In this episode of Sustainability Matters Today, I interviewed Dorry Price, sustainability and climate change consultant and champion on contributing future-ready solutions to corporate sustainability. As a consultant, Dorry creates innovative solutions and a thriving environment for communities across the UK. She's also a steering group member of the IEMA Futures Network, and IEMA is spelled I-E-M-A. Dorry wrote an article called For the Record, where she discusses the role blockchain could have to help the UK transition to a low-carbon economy. Please make sure to subscribe to the Sustainability Matters Today podcast to learn more about other champions of sustainability like Dorry. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you for joining me, Dorry. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So, are you in London right now?
Yes, so I'm calling from East London.
Ooh, East London. Very cool.
Very trendy.
Yeah, exactly. I'm more of a Northwest London person, but East London is becoming a very cool part of town. And I'm actually calling in from Seattle, or near Seattle, where it's been raining for the last 24 hours nonstop. Probably longer, but I've only been here for that long. One thing I've noticed is everyone says, because I've moved to London about 3.5 years ago, everyone says, "Oh wow, London, it rains there all the time."
Actually, it doesn't.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. It rains not very often.
Absolutely. You notice this as a cyclist as well, is how many rainy days there are. I used to live in Vancouver, so not too far from Seattle, and I definitely noticed when it rained.
Yeah, I've actually never thought of that. Cyclists are probably the most aware.
We're very prone, yeah.
So going on to why we're here today, it's really to talk about being a sustainability consultant, which I think is really cool because a lot of the people that have been on the show so far, they are working for a company that is either doing something specific towards sustainability, or they work in a division in a company that makes the company sustainable. But what you do is actually a little bit different in the sense that you work with a variety of clients, trying to and helping those clients become sustainable or be prepared to be sustainable. Is that the general idea?
Yeah, so I've been a sustainability consultant for the past couple of years, and I work within sort of a corporate advisory division, we'd call it, of a large professional services firm. So companies come to us with a range of problems that they might look for, they might want to find a solution for. But we work specifically developing solutions for sustainability related challenges for a really wide range of sectors and clients across that.
That's really cool. And how did you choose? I'm curious to know, because well, first of all, you were at the House of Fraser before.
Yes.
That was kind of like your first foray into sustainability, wasn't it?
Yes.
Is there a difference between working for kind of like House of Fraser and just focusing on one company versus working with a range of clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're working what we would call sort of in-house or client side with a company like House of Fraser, and also I don't know if I should put it into a little bit of context, because I don't know how, many listeners might be listening from the UK. But if you're a bit more international, you might not have heard of House of Fraser, I guess. So House of Fraser's a UK-based department store, so a bit like a Nordstrom in America. We have a lot of different brands, but also House of Fraser has their own line of sort of women's wear, men's wear, and homeware products. So I used to sit in a sustainability team there before I became a consultant. And when you're in that sort of client side, you tend to find that even in a pretty big company like House of Fraser, you might sit in a very, very small sustainability team, and your job is to research key trends, to develop that strategy, and effectively to program manage its implementation across your business. Because there's no way, especially in an organization that wants to be ambitious with regards to sustainability, there's no way that the size of the teams that are usually doing it can do it. And so you're more acting as a facilitator. You're training people, you're engaging them, you're understanding the processes that they need to follow, and thinking about how sustainability can be integrated into that. So that often requires you to think a lot about, how do we build a business case around this so that it makes sense for everybody, and so that it's not just good for the planet, but it's also going to create a viable business model. You're also usually working on much longer timeframes, maybe 5 years or 10 years to really integrate a key strategy. And to, in the case of House of Fraser, you're trying to turn a historically really unsustainable business model into something completely different. And that's obviously going to take time, and it require working with people across the business. So then as a consultant, your job is kind of a flip side. You're almost actually as an extension of those sustainability teams. They come to you for key bits of advice or guidance or whatever it might be. So you're often, depending on your client and the relationship with them, you might only be working with them for a very short period of time. They want some data related to the sustainability of their packaging, or they want some guidance about how to set their strategy. So, you could be with them for a couple of months and it could be a really quick turnaround and a bit of research for them, or you could be working with them for years. But you tend to see that the advice that you give, you kind of have to be mindful that you're there to guide them and to act as that extension of their team often, but you don't have the control over how it's implemented in practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of a lot to unpack there, and I'd love to spend most of the time, I think, talking about the consulting side because it sounds really interesting. But
Absolutely.
I think the House of Fraser is a really interesting use case for sustainability just because of how complex I think it is. First of all, House of Fraser I think is well known. I've seen it in London and in Manchester during Christmas. They cover their storefront, and it's like 3 or 4 stories tall, right? With lights. It's so bright, and it's actually really beautiful. But I imagine that it uses a lot of energy, unless there is some pretty clever stuff that House of Fraser is doing in terms of renewables. But in terms of like the kind of the key things, I mean, building a business case and training staff members, what are some of the things that a company like House of Fraser, which, as you said, is like a Nordstrom or a Macy's for people based in the U.S., what are some of the key lessons, I guess, that you need to impart on other members of the company?
Yeah, that's a really important role that a sustainability team needs to sort of take on when they're thinking about integrating sustainability into an organization like House of Fraser. Who are the people that you need to identify? Who are the teams that you need to work with? Who are the sort of gatekeepers to certain decisions in order to make sure that sustainability makes sense and is a priority? I think one of the things that I've seen be very successful is having, and I think is essential for any company that wants to really take sustainability seriously, is having senior level buy-in. So making sure that, a sustainability team needs to not sit in a separate, siloed sort of traditional CSR team.
Yeah.
It needs to be something that's prioritized and that people are going to listen to, because sometimes it can slow processes down. And what you need to be able to do is help people to understand it may slow you down initially, but the long-term risk that we're going to be able to avoid is worth it. And in order to kind of have those conversations, I think something that's really important is also being able to speak the language of the people that you're talking to. And I think, in any industry, it can be easy to be guilty of it. But, in sustainability, there's lots of, terminology and acronyms, and it can be quite complicated. And you need to make sure that the way that you're communicating with people is in the language that they understand, and prioritizes the things that are going to be priorities for them. So, for example, in fashion, you've got to consider that the people that you're working with, designers and buyers, are working to their own KPIs and criteria as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to think and understand what those are and how sustainability isn't a hindrance for them, but actually maximizes and makes things easier for them.
KPIs, I mean, would they typically be financial, or is it not always?
Absolutely. So it will usually be around to do with time and finance. So how can you build sustainability, and why should sustainability be a priority for teams that are trying to, buy the best quality product for the best price on the fastest time frame, so that we can make sure that as a company we're competitive and we're bringing out the best that we can for our consumers. So my focus when I was at House of Fraser and, as a consultant as well, and sort of an interest of mine, has always been around supply chains and how we can integrate sustainability within a supply chain context.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in a fashion supply chain, it's highly complex. There's so many different players. How can we make sure that we're thinking about not just environment, but human rights, etc., in that process? And why should, it's not that people don't care. Of course, everybody cares about sustainability issues, but how can they integrate those into what they're already doing in a way that makes sense for them in a tangible way? So it's also about, thinking, okay, well, in the short term, we can buy from, suppliers maybe without having these conversations. But in the long run, and, House of Fraser has been a victim of this. Any big name brand is going to have had sustainability issues to do with modern slavery, particularly in the early 2000s. Loads of companies came under the hammer for modern slavery.
Mm-hmm.
The use of fur, the use of child labor.
Yeah.
And once people kind of understand potentially the short-term risk, impact versus the long-term benefit, you can kind of start to have that shift. And then once that's in place, you're away, because then the process already understands it and already has it built in.
Yeah. Is sourcing a big part of the sustainability team's focus, as in working with suppliers that are committed to sustainability, or perhaps if they're not, because a big part of House of Fraser and any kind of department store is to have a large selection and a large quantity of items that people can choose from. So would communicating with the brands that you're selling, saying look, here are some of the values that House of Fraser is basically adopting, and we want you to get as close to as possible to meeting those or better. Is that something that someone's doing, or perhaps only going for brands that meet a certain criteria, for example, and cutting out the ones that don't?
It can be like that. So you may find that there are companies or department stores that are starting, maybe not even to cut out, but to prioritize companies that can show that they're meeting or that their values are aligned with where they're trying to go from a sustainability perspective.
Right.
Equally, you may find that within a supply chain context, so also for context, House of Fraser has brands that they work with where, you may be able to have a conversation, but you can't have direct control over what happens because you're buying from them,
Right.
and it's not your process. But equally, House of Fraser also has their own brands that they own, and therefore they have greater transparency into the supply chain. You may decide that you're only going to work with suppliers that meet certain criteria, but that can be hard to know, and it can also be hard to leverage because in fashion, you buy so much and from such a wide range of factories, you may find that, you only have a very small percentage or stake in a large number of factories. And therefore your ability to influence and change things may be more limited. And that's why at least from my experience, I've seen greater collaboration in industry, not just in fashion, but in a lot of other industries I've now worked with as a consultant, where people are starting to realize, yes, we can have a really strong sustainability stance in this, but actually we need everybody to come along with us because if we were working together, we have so much more leverage on these processes.
How difficult is it to get that kind of across the board buy-in?
Sometimes it can be a real challenge. And I think, from my experience, retail has historically been more, companies hold their cards closer to their chest in terms of who they're buying from,
Yeah.
etc., may not want that information to be shared. But from my experience, both, working in-house and as a consultant and in the research that I did from my master's, actually, there's kind of a greater acknowledgement that, with information being as available as it is these days, that, these secrets are not as closely guarded as they may have historically been. And there's a much greater opportunity to collaborate on these things, and it works for everybody. And I think there has been a shift to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think the other interesting part about it is that there are now brands that are becoming that are sort of going the other direction and becoming really transparent about their supply chain.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, in food, for instance, at least in London, you have companies like Farm Drop and Able and Cole, and then there's Field and Flour, and these are basically food delivery companies where they deliver food to your house, and they're incredibly transparent about where their food comes from, and they even tell you the farm, and they have a little bio about the farmer. I think there is a lot of demand for that kind of level of transparency. People are becoming, very interested to know where their products come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think fashion is increasingly seeing that. The
Yeah,
difficulty has always been that fashion supply chains are much longer and can be a lot more complex. And
yeah,
so
that's true.
it's what technologies and things that we can leverage now to be able to try and understand that and have more clarity on that. Often it's not that they don't want to be transparent. It's just that the nature of it means that it's very complicated that in any one time to have a very accurate snapshot of where things have come from. But I
Yeah.
think, maybe that will change as well.
And actually, speaking of supply chain and kind of transparency, and I guess being able to be sustainable with the supply chain means having great transparency and being able to easily understand and explain where each part comes from, whether it's food or fashion or any other um, product. But you
Hmm.
you wrote an article about blockchain and
Yes.
sustainability. One of the great benefits of blockchain, I mean, there's probably an infinite number of things you can do with blockchain, but one of them is supply chain, because you're able to easily understand where each part of a product comes from, and it's very well organized. I know very little about blockchain, and it's one of those buzzwords right now, which I think there's a lot of merit for it. But can you tell a little bit about blockchain and sustainability? It's, I think, a really cool way to use the technology.
Yeah. So the idea of the blockchain is that you can basically make a digital footprint of, in theory, any sort of transaction that happens throughout a supply chain. So, from a sustainability perspective, it really touches on what we've just been talking about in terms of the traceability or the provenance of products.
Mm,
Um, and it has an opportunity to be an amazing platform to tell those stories. And what it could, in theory, do, for example, is, if you're wanting to buy fish that's been sustainably sourced, or buy cotton that's, definitely organic, and made, free of child or modern slavery.
yeah.
Um, is this a way of creating an insight and a totally immutable um, piece of information about a product?
Mm,
And it's been used a number of times, and there's really exciting examples of where it's been used successfully. I think the problem with it is it requires really good data in the first place, and I think at the end of the day, it's still going to be human input of data, and we could never eliminate, or at least at the moment, I don't see how the opportunity for error, or for the opportunity for the data to not be perfect, could be eliminated from that.
Yeah, one of the things I'm thinking of is you're saying, like it's a way to say whether or not cotton, for example, had there was child labor involved. But in theory, because the blockchain is about being able to accurately store data and
Hmm.
accurately record it, right? It's not about, as in theory, someone could say our cotton is there. We don't use any child labor, but that could be a lie, and
Hmm.
that it would just store that information anyway. It doesn't prevent from
Right,
lying, does it?
right,
Yeah,
exactly. It still requires accurate data to have been
right.
put in the first place. Then the way that that data is shared, and so from a provenance perspective, it's quite exciting because you would have all those steps along the supply chain, and you'd be able to see those. But it requires that that data in the first place was correct.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's plenty of challenges that come along with that.
Well, yeah, indeed, yeah.
Yeah, and so going now to the what you've been doing basically for the last couple of years after House of Fraser, which is basically consulting sustainability teams, which I think is a really interesting description, at least, of how it works. Is I guess it sounds like um, just to go back to what we were talking about earlier. So there's a sustainability team at House of Fraser, and let's just say they need a little bit more assistance, and they essentially need an extra pair of hands or a couple extra people to chip in. Is that when they could, in theory, reach out to someone like you and say, we're working on this project, we need a little bit of help. Can here's what we're working on.
Yeah, and it could be, and we see, all sorts of things that our clients might ask us for, and it ranges massively. Uh, the company that was working for previously is it's historically quite technical. So
Mhm.
you might find that clients come to us a lot for technical pieces of information. So let's say you want to change the packaging that you're using for a product, but maybe you're actually not sure, what's the most environmentally friendly from a carbon perspective, or what's the most environmentally friendly from a water perspective, or should we be using this packaging, or should we remove it entirely? And they may just want the data to support those decisions, and in which case we can crunch the numbers for them and look into that, and give them a variety of solutions in that way. Because what you do often find is with sustainability, you may not find there's one golden answer that ticks all of the boxes. It's
Mhm.
about sort of making compromises and trying to find the best solution for that situation. So we can help sort of do the legwork behind that to inform decision making. That's on the one hand. Then on the other hand, and what we're seeing increasingly is that a company may come to us and say, look, we don't have a strategy at all. And we really want to place sustainability, at the core of what we're doing. How do we get started? And we can help them to understand what sort of issues might be of the biggest priority to them and to their stakeholders, and use that to go forward with them.
Probably, in my opinion, those projects would be by far the most interesting, where they come in and they say, okay, here's our business, here's what we're doing. We've made promises to to cut carbon emissions and do this, that, and the other. How do we do it? And then what is it? It's like you go in there, do you start interviewing people and basically learning about the business and if they have a supply chain, how that all works and how the products are sold and so on and so forth. And then based on that, you start thinking, okay, where can we start making changes?
Yes. So in strategy development, we often will use something in sustainability called a materiality assessment.
Huh.
So materiality is around understanding what is important to you as a business. And then we can use that as building blocks for deciding where to focus on. Because, sustainability covers so many issues. You're not going, it covers environment, it covers social issues, it covers economic issues. And within that, it can be subdivided into so many priorities. So our very first step would be to conduct one of these assessments. And we look not just as you as a business, but we'd also look at your stakeholders, um, and the importance of those stakeholders to you. And through discussions with the client and through the discussions with their stakeholders, we can then build a picture of what will be important to prioritize. Once we've understood that, we can then create, a roadmap from where we are now to where we want to be, and set the strategy like that.
Yeah, and would you be helping them implement the roadmap, or it's more like, okay, here it is. Now, good luck. Let us know how it goes.
It all depends on the client.
Yeah.
Often it would be like that. These are the things that we've identified. These are some, this is kind of a suggested way to get there, and then see how it goes. But, with anything, you also need to reevaluate. So many of our clients would come back to us and say, okay, that was great for, 2019. Now, what are we going to do for 2020? What are we going to do
Mhm.
for 2030? And kind of, it's a constantly uh, changing and dynamic sort of process.
Yeah, who would you say typically reaches out to a consultant? I mean, would that fall under the COO, or is there like I mean, you mentioned the CSR team. Is there kind of a typical department that focuses on implementing this within their company?
You will typically speak to a sustainability team, but
Right.
not necessarily. And it also depends, where the company is in terms of their journey towards becoming a more sustainable organization. Um, yeah, often you'd speak to a sustainability team. But with smaller companies, you may find that you're speaking to the COO, or you might find that you're speaking to a marketing and communications team, which is,
Mm.
you know, where you can often find sustainability people, given its nature in terms of storytelling, and reputation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I never really considered the marketing side, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that's probably one of the best places for it to live, just because, like we were saying, a lot of people are now interested in sustainability. I mean, clients, and they want that. It's something that they're really demanding. I think I certainly do when I'm buying any products. I always think about, well, what's kind of my footprint here that I'm leaving by making any sort of purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, marketing teams have definitely, it's definitely been a place where sustainability has sat. I think that's sort of, it is almost moving, it's still important there, but it is kind of moving into, we need to have dedicated teams for this. I think that can be a challenge when sustainability sits purely within a sort of marketing and communications area of a company. There's always a risk that um, what is being communicated might not actually be backed up by what's being done in practice, and
Yeah,
then they may be lacking a sort of technical element to that. And there's always risks of greenwashing. I don't know if you've heard this term, of things kind
yes.
of being marketed as super sustainable, but actually when you look into it at all, it really isn't.
Yeah, the greenwashing, I'd love to talk about that a bit more, because I think that that's the more I speak to people, the more I'm realizing that greenwashing is a really big concern for a lot of people in the sustainability field, because you have people who are actually working really hard to do really great stuff, and then you have people who say that they're working really hard to do great stuff. Um, and they're not always the same. Sometimes, like you were saying, it's people who are like, maybe they're well intentioned. Let's just be optimistic and say they are, but they're not actually. Their company isn't um, basically completing everything that they're promising. I guess if an end consumer is making a purchasing decision based on the story that's being portrayed about the product and its environmental impacts, and a company is saying, we run only on renewable energy, let's say, and this plastic bottle or whatever that you're buying is completely recycled, but actually it's not. That's greenwashing, isn't it? Or is it a bit more complicated than that?
No, I mean, basically, I'd say in any case where you're saying something, um, or you're making a sustainability related claim, which isn't backed up or verified, I think you're at risk of that. And that's where I think consultants have a lot of opportunity as well, and a lot of as an opportunity when we're discussing with our clients. I did say before, sometimes with a consultant, our job is to deliver what our client has asked for, and you may not
Right.
have an insight beyond that, but you may. And especially with clients that you've worked with for a long time, you have an opportunity to be sort of a critical friend to them and say, um, you've developed this data into maybe a marketing campaign or a piece of material for your consumers. I would include a statement, or we would advise that you include a statement that explains this or caveats this, so that we know that we're being completely transparent with our consumers about what we're trying to claim on certain products or processes. And there's a real opportunity for consultants there, because you have that slight level of removal from the core sustainability teams in these organizations.
Yeah, that's really cool. It seems like being a sustainability consultant is like it's kind of like almost a superpower. You get to go in and um, help companies become like save the earth almost. Do you feel fulfilled doing this kind of thing, having these kind of conversations with companies and saying, because you're really impacting the way that companies can work, and you get to work with a lot of different players, and doing your best to essentially lessen the negative environmental impact that they have on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, from a big picture perspective, it's really exciting because, as you say, you get to work with a really diverse range of companies, working on a whole different range of sustainability challenges that they might be having, and you can kind of break that down and find solutions for them, or help set strategies to overcome those difficulties, and it's really exciting. Obviously, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, when you're in the nitty-gritty of
Yeah,
technical work,
true.
you can, it's like anything, but it is really exciting space to work in, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of doing this backwards because I'd like to get into a little bit about how you got started in the industry. I mean, or in the field rather. You said that you did a master's
Hmm.
in sustainability. How, I guess, first of all, how did you choose to go down that route? And then, second of all, what was the master's program about, and what were some of the key takeaways?
So I think, like most people, I think they can relate to this, is I sort of meandered my way towards a career in sustainability. I have a background in physical geography, and I came out of that sort of, I wanted a career that wasn't just providing a service to others, but was really solutions focused for clients. But I also wanted a sort of global and wider context. And I think, as an individual, I'm really passionate about the environment. I love hiking and skiing and being in the outdoors. And to me, sort of sustainability was a bit of a natural fit for me. Okay, environment's not the only element of sustainability, but it's a really important one, and it kind of just made sense. And after I had finished my undergraduate degree, I'd never even heard of sustainability or in-house sustainability teams, but I sort of came across it while I was living in Vancouver on the west coast of Canada, and I thought, this is a really, really exciting space. And that's when I applied to do a MSc in environmental technology at Imperial College London. It's a really big master's program. They take on about 150 students a year,
Mm.
but each student has to specialize in one of, I think it's about 10 different areas. And one of those areas is business and the environment. And it's a really hands-on practical course where you get involved in working and talking to businesses about different sustainability challenges that they have every single day. And that's
Mm.
how I first came across House of Fraser. And I first started working with them was through the program at Imperial. And it's a fantastic platform, and it's got a really strong alumni network. And after I graduated from there, um, I I started my consulting career.
Yeah, really cool. So, I've heard some people say that there's no money in sustainability. It's not really a job, or there's no career path in this field. Based on your experience so far, what would you say to that?
I would say it's an area that's really only just getting started. I know that, historically there have been CSR teams,
Mm.
but sustainability's sort of, I think, in the last, even just 5 or 10 years is really exploding as an idea that isn't just a good thing to do or the right thing to do, but it also makes business sense. And if you want to manage the risks of your business, it has to be a key consideration. And I think, you know, climate change is going to impact global supply chains in unprecedented ways. Consumers are starting to shift the way that they think about the products that they buy and the impact of their money on companies and products. And the financial services sector as well, in recent years, it's really starting to take what they call ESG, so environmental, social, and governance indicators, as a way of managing risk in their investments as well. And I think the landscape for it is really shifting, and it's shifting quite fast. And I think my impression is that we're only going to see it increasing in importance, and we'll go from there.
So for people who are interested in going into this field, would you say that there's plenty of room and a lot of opportunity, and you'd recommend it, or perhaps maybe wait a little bit and see where it goes first before diving head first?
I would say that there are a lot of opportunities to get involved. I mean, from my perspective, sustainability can be a really hard area to get into. It's a market that is piquing a lot of people's interest, particularly, young millennials. Why
Yep.
wouldn't you want to do a career that you get to work with big global companies and influence change and prioritize things like climate change and modern slavery and make sure that we're taking those issues seriously? It's really exciting space to be in. But because of that, and because, you don't need to have you don't, it's not like law or medicine where you need to have a degree in it to do it. If you can think about problems in a dynamic way, there's no reason why you can't have a career in sustainability either. So I think you find that sometimes at the very bottom, it can be a really flooded market because everybody wants to get involved. But consulting is not, being a sustainability consultant is not the only way to be involved in sustainability, and sitting in a sustainability team is not the only way to be involved in sustainability. Kind of, we've alluded to it already a bit, but it's something that everybody in organizations needs to and will have to take responsibility for. And I think, even if you've just started a career in finance, let's say, and you're thinking, God, I want to work in sustainability, and I've now committed to a career in finance, there's no space for sustainability here. There is. You need to think about, is there an opportunity to integrate these ideas into what I'm doing already? Because that's where I see it going. Hopefully everybody's going to be thinking about these things and managing them, and that's an opportunity to kind of gain experience even when you're more junior.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think with finance in particular, there is a lot of room for having an interest in sustainability. There's one of the previous episodes I recorded with
Yeah,
JP Dullman, he focuses on what he calls impact investing,
yeah,
which is a term. Um, and he was saying that the power of investing is huge when it comes to making a change in terms of, or making positive impact um, with sustainability, because well, according to some studies, it's much more powerful in terms of the direction that the company goes in, on based on the investment that goes into it rather than just purchasing. I think the number is, I might be wrong here, I need to double check it, but it could be like 25 times more impactful to invest in a company that's focusing on sustainability rather than just purchasing a product from them. So I think for people who are in finance, specifically, just because you mentioned it, there's a lot of room to make impact and actually have a really fulfilling career. Yeah, great, good to hear that there's a lot of opportunity, but it sounds like it's a bit it's popular, and it's quite competitive at this point.
yeah, absolutely. Particularly, as I said, from my experience at least, at the more junior level, you can find, it would not be uncommon for sort of, 200 or 300 people to apply for a junior level sustainability role. So, anything that you can do in a pre-existing role to demonstrate your commitment and your thinking around it is an amazing start already.
Yeah. Huh. That's quite some competition. Yeah. So being clever about it is sounds like the way to go. I guess you can even start really small. I mean, like just starting to put different practices at your office in place, like just organizing a recycling bin, for example, at your office, or putting a compost little food waste collection bin. Those they're small things, but they end up accumulating quite quickly because there's so many people who are working in an office, particularly if you're working in a larger company. I mean, if you have 50 people who are starting to put all their food waste into a bin, that's quite a lot of diversion from landfill that otherwise would have just gone straight there. So you really can. I think that's a good point. You really can make a lot more impact and kind of be like a sustainability ninja.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you are, just starting out as well, identify those people in your organization that, you do want to work with. Yeah, sustainability teams are small, but often I've found, in sustainability teams that I know, they might bring somebody, you might be a designer and they might bring a sustainability, they might bring you across to work in the sustainability team if that's what you've shown that you're really passionate about, because actually having the perspective of being a designer or a buyer could be really useful for a
Yeah.
sustainability team. So you kind of never really know. And unfortunately, that sort of is difficult when you're then advising people, but there isn't one way into
Hmm.
sustainability at all.
Yeah, I think a buyer could have a lot of impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to House of Fraser, I mean, if your job is to source the best quality, um, or you're sourcing the products that you're selling, you have a pretty big opportunity there. And on that note, we're approaching our time here. So the final question I'd love to ask, Dory, is kind of in addition to what we've talked about just now, and how you can kind of ease your way into sustainability on a professional sense. Are there any things that people can do on a day-to-day basis when perhaps they are at work or not at work, or maybe things that you do to promote sustainability on a day-to-day basis that our listeners could maybe take away and start practicing themselves?
I think actually, in many ways, when I think about what I do to be more sustainable in my day to day life, it's actually very similar the advice I'd give to people that I would give to my clients. And it's about,
Uh,
all, you have to think about what's important to you. You can't do everything. And I think sometimes around sustainability, there can be a feeling like, oh, I don't eat meat, but occasionally I do want to fly home to, Seattle because I want to see my family. And
yeah,
there can be sometimes a bit of feeling of guilt, I think, around not being able to do everything, or some people are doing some things and other people aren't. And oh, I've been served a drink with a plastic straw, and these issues are so complex. I think as a start, I'd think about what's most important to you and where do you think that you can have the most impact, and start there as a priority. You can always reevaluate that and change things, but for me, a really big part, I ride my bike whenever I can.
yeah,
I'm not vegan, I'm not vegetarian, but I'm really conscious that when I do eat meat, I try and buy from reputable sources, and I don't eat meat or fish every day. In fact, I don't a lot of the time, but kind of everything in moderation. Trying to do the right thing when I can, because there's so many different things that you can do, and kind of just find out where you can have an impact and focus on that.
yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think it's this is a long-term kind of thing that we're doing in terms of living life in an environmentally friendly way or in a sustainable way. So I think it's important that you are consistent.
Yeah,
I think it's more important to do the best you can consistently rather than try to be perfect, fail, and then give up and never try again.
yeah, absolutely.
Like you said, if you just balance it, to me that makes the most sense because then you're doing the best you can, and maybe you're inspiring other people to make some small changes which add up, and the habits hopefully start building on top of another.
Yeah, absolutely. Use it as an opportunity to have a conversation.
Yeah, yeah, that's really true. Um, so it's good to know that there isn't too much pressure. That making one small change at a time is good, and helpful, and then you don't need to be a perfectionist about it. So it's okay to make some mistakes and just keep going and doing your best.
I'm sure others would disagree with me, but
Yeah, I'm
yeah, as you
sure.
say, everybody's got to do their part, and I think if we're all trying to do our best, then that's a great place to start.
And on that note, Dory, thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you get to work with a lot of really cool clients in the new year in 2020. So good luck with all of the projects that you have coming up, and looking forward to hearing more about it in the near future.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Great to be on the show.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, and also give us a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen to it on. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe so that you can be notified of the next episode. And also, reach out to us on social media. We're on Instagram at Sustainability Matters Today. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and talk to you soon.